without further delay, I'd like to turn today's program over to your presenters, Bonnie Brescia, Founding Principal, Matthew Stumm, Director, Creative Services, Linda Wolf, Market Development Strategist. And Bonnie, I'll hand the floor over to you.
Thank you, Marvin, for that introduction, and thank you to everyone who has joined us for this webinar. We've had an outstanding response from the clinical trial community, which I think indicates clearly that social media is an area of intense interest for its potential in generating study participants. So let's talk. We're going to present some ideas for you to consider, and during the webinar, you'll be able to have input through the mini polls, the ongoing chat, and the live questions, and we're going to try to reserve at least 10 minutes for those. If the chat function is not yet open on your screen, you can activate it by clicking the button at the top right of the webinar window, and shockingly enough, it says chat. We did a similar version of this webinar on Tuesday afternoon, and the chat really was very interesting, so encourage you to participate, and we'll participate also as BBK. If you would like to remain anonymous and use that chat function, you could log off and log back in using the bird name that we provided you in the login instructions. So the only other thing I would encourage is that you make sure to say send to all participants so everyone can hear your question or see your comment and respond in turn. I'd also like to thank my colleagues Matt Stumm and Linda Wolf, both of whom have contributed to advancing patient recruitment through developing and refining new services, such as the application of social media to the conundrum of patient recruitment. It's been my privilege to work alongside them for many, many years. Our agenda for today covers three major areas. First, defining social media and its applications to patient recruitment. Second, thinking about how we fit social media into the marketing mix in order to achieve specific patient recruitment goals. And then also acknowledging that many of us are having to address objections that are coming from inside our organizations. So before we go any further, I'd like to start by asking a polling question and have Marvin post that. On the right-hand side of your screen, in just a minute, you will see the question, a polling box open with the question, are you a member of a social media site? So please choose yes, no, or not sure, and we'll see the answers in a minute or so. We'll leave that up for a couple of more minutes more seconds rather. So one of the social media sites that I use most to track and monitor trends is Facebook, and I think everybody's heard of it, but I don't know if you have an appreciation for how significant it is. There are 350 million users worldwide, which is equal to the total population of the U.S. and Canada, and a full half of those people, 175 million, log in every day, and that's their data as of February 1st of this year. The user base has grown significantly, 145%, with the 35-plus demographic now representing more than 30% of its entire user base. And that number continues to climb. You can see that the over 55 group has grown a whopping 900+% just in 2009. Marvin, can you close that poll and get that posted for us right after you switch the slide? I wanted to, and when he gets to that, there you go. There's a map here showing that Facebook really is the undisputed leader of social networking, certainly in the English-speaking parts of the world, but it's also made tremendous strides in Latin America, Europe, and Africa as well. Do we have our poll results yet, or shall we continue? Yeah, I'm going to turn it over now to Linda Wolf, and she's going to explore exactly what we mean by social media.
Great, thank you, Bonnie. I'm going to start with a simple definition, and just to put it simply, social media is an online, that is internet-based mechanism for users to interact with the creators and the content of a website, as well as with each other. Some people call it user-generated content. You may have heard that term. Social media can include social networks, which many of us have certainly heard about. And based on the poll results, it looks like almost half of us are members of a social network. And that would include Facebook, LinkedIn, MySpace. There are many of them. Other social media include blogs and microblogs like Twitter, video sharing sites like YouTube, social news sites where you can add your comments to the news and interact with people, even journalists, social bookmarking sites, and wikis, of course. All of these platforms allow for varying levels of interactivity, privacy, and access. We've all heard the buzz about applying social media to patient recruitment, so let's look at the range of uses in which we can put this new media, and you can see some of these on the slide here. Certainly, we can look at using social media for recruiting specific trials, but there are many other ways we can access and leverage it for answering patient recruitment questions. For example, conducting market research. There's a whole new field called social media monitoring, and that builds on and enhances what traditional market research does to provide insights and information about patients who are online. We can also use social media for shortening recruitment for future trials by building relationships with patients, and that can offer them opportunities for clinical trial participation in the near future. Expanding on that idea, we can also build long-term and franchise-level communities, and those can support recruitment of multiple protocols and multiple therapeutic areas over time. Social media also offers an opportunity for sponsors to consider communicating and maintaining relationships with patients and physicians to build a reputation as a sponsor of choice, so to speak, for clinical trial participation. And it can serve an even broader purpose for building that reputation into a bigger presence as a leader in clinical research focusing on patient care. And now, Marvin, if we could go to the next polling question. I'd like to ask everybody, you'll see that polling question come up to your right in a second. I'd like to ask everybody, has your company used social media tactics for patient recruitment, given the definitions that we just went through? Please choose yes, no, or not sure. And I'm going to give you a few seconds to vote, so if you would go ahead and do that, that'd be great. Meanwhile, here's some fascinating facts. In 2009, did you know that 90 trillion emails were sent over the internet? YouTube serves 1 billion videos in a day. Also, did you know that there are 27.3 million tweets on Twitter in a day? And perhaps not surprising, 84% of social networks have more women than men as members. If we could go to the next slide and close the chat. Close the polls. I'd like to turn this over now to Matt to talk about how we can actually, what I'd like to do is talk about how we can apply these topics to patient recruitment. So there are 3 applications. We can use social media to listen to our audiences, where there's a vast amount of information being shared on social media, and there are methods for collecting and analyzing that data. We can also use it to inform our audiences by delivering messages, just as with any other marketing channel. And we can engage our customers and our audiences through interaction and relationship, which is really the essence of social media. And if I'm just going to take a look here and see what folks said about using social media for patient recruitment. It looks like the majority of people either have not used it or are not sure. So there's just a few, just over 10% of people have used social media for patient recruitment. So very interesting. Let's talk a little bit about listening. Listening to online social media has become a field in itself. You might have heard it called social media monitoring or even setting up a listening platform. There's lots of people that you can listen to online. There are patients, caregivers, there are advocates for patients, there are healthcare providers, all sorts of influencers. Now, why do we listen? Through monitoring, we can collect, as I mentioned, these massive amounts of data, and then we can filter it through to listen for sheer volume, how much conversation is happening on a particular topic, the share of voice, which audiences are saying the most about what and which have the most influence. Also sentiment. How do people feel overall about a company or a treatment regimen or a trial itself? And are those messages overall negative, positive, or neutral? We can identify individuals who are opinion leaders and their impact on overall opinion about clinical trials. And we can track trending issues or market events or even competitive activities that could affect recruitment campaigns. So let's look at what we actually listen to. There's a wide range of sources and topics. We can tune into what patients are saying, what key patient influencers are saying. There are healthcare bloggers out there, members of communities of all sorts, and you can look at the range of social media to find content. Blogs, blog comments, message boards, search indices, even tweets on Twitter. So how does this work? If you have these massive amounts of information, extracting meaning can be really complex. And there's actually some differences between this type of monitoring and traditional market research techniques. We start, of course, with the great cloud of social media. And from that, we define our research goals. We want to identify which questions we want to answer and develop a strategy for getting to that information. Then we go ahead and start collecting large volumes of the consumer-generated media, literally billions of discussions, into one database. The data can be identified, mined, tagged, identified with author, date, time the content was created, source of the content, and so forth. And then that data are standardized into one relational database. This is the starting point at which we apply natural language processing and rigorous analysis. Tagged information can be cross-tabulated, and it can compare audiences, sources, et cetera, so that we can get critical metrics and get to that information about volume and share of voice and sentiment. And then we apply this analysis to answer the questions that we originally started with and generate recommendations for moving forward. And now I'll turn it over to Matt to discuss how we can use those results.
Thanks, Linda. So we've learned a little bit about listening, about how we listen, what we listen to, but what do we do with all this information that we've gathered from our listening efforts? Well, there's a bunch of applications that can be applied through social media. First of all, an example would be understanding the feasibility of running a particular type of trial for a patient population within a specific country. Listening might give you the qualitative and quantitative data needed, which could express the degree to which patients feel underserved or satisfied with their medical treatment, their current medical treatment, information about their feelings on the cost of current medications and how happy they feel about that, or if they feel that they're being overcharged. So it really can give you some insight into just the psychographics of a patient population. The data can also return information about specific recruitment barriers as well as opportunities. Now, you can aggregate the opinions of patients and caregivers about their ability to get a doctor's appointment, or their willingness to engage in an invasive procedure that may be planned for a study, or their willingness to find new treatment options. Now, with this knowledge that you've gained, you can begin to develop effective messaging for reaching this audience, determine the best way to deliver your message, and consider whether you want to engage them in a two-way conversation and how that conversation could benefit not only you but the patient who you are trying to reach.